this story will continue. Through me.
I'm done enough, okay?
And that's wonderful.
Okay. 1 minute, people.
Morning, over 20,000 people will take part in Wales's biggest road race, the Cardiff Half Marathon. BBC Two Wales will be live at the heart of the action from 8:30 right to the finish line. Send your good luck messages using the hashtag BBC Cardiff Half.
Among those on Question Time tonight, the singer Charlotte Church, a staunch supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, Margaret Thatcher's admirer and biographer Charles Moore, and Neil Kinnock's son Stephen, newly elected to the House of Commons, and plenty to talk about Syria, nuclear deterrence, and indeed Labour's leadership. Join us at 10:35 here on BBC One.
And before Question Time, the BBC News now on BBC One Wales with Rita Chakrabarti and Lucia Owen. It's 10 o'clock.
Washington strongly condemns Moscow after Russian warplanes strike more targets in Syria. The Russian attack hits rebels in the west of the country. Moscow says it's taking on the terrorists.
If it looks like a terrorist, if it acts like a terrorist, if it walks like a terrorist, if it fights like a terrorist, it's a terrorist.
We have exclusive filming from inside Syria as America accuses Russia of random airstrikes against the Syrian opposition. With Washington saying Moscow has made a grave miscalculation, we'll be examining the claims. Also tonight,
1174 medical aid. This is for an active shooter at UCC.
At least 13 people are shot dead at a community college in the US state of Oregon. Jeremy Corbyn says Labour may not have made up its mind on Trident in time for elections to Holyrood next year.
I'll be reporting on how scientists are finding plastic waste in the ocean every time they look for it. And I'll be asking if charging for plastic bags will make a difference.
Davis,
And powering forward, Wales take on Fiji in the Rugby World Cup. In Wales, tributes to a 12-year-old Liverpool fan who died after falling from a rope swing near the River Dee. And huge relief for Wales as they clinch another World Cup win after a bruising encounter with Fiji. Good evening. Russian warplanes pounded rebels in Syria again today, leading to a highly tense diplomatic standoff between Moscow and Washington. After claims that at least one Syrian rebel group backed by America had been attacked, the White House tonight called the Russian strikes indiscriminate and a grave miscalculation. Reports say the Russian targets included areas of Idlib in the north, as well as Hama and Homs further south. Those are in areas, shown here in red, which are under the control of anti-regime rebels, but not so-called Islamic State. IS dominates these areas, shown here in orange, which are further to the east. There are reports that hundreds of troops from Iran have also been arriving to fight on the government side. From Moscow, Steve Rosenberg reports.
This is the Russian airbase in Syria, Latakia. It's from here that Russian fighter jets have been setting off on their bombing missions. Moscow calls it their war on international terrorism. The airstrikes carried out by Russian planes have hit Islamic State arms depots, the Air Force spokesman explains, fuel stores, weapons and command and communication posts. We're preparing now for our next missions. But against who? The Russians have been insisting that their principal target is Islamic State. And yet many of the areas they've hit appear to be held by other groups which are opposed to President Assad. Today, Russia's foreign minister admitted that Moscow's target was broader than Islamic State. Russia was fighting terrorists.
Which specific groups in Syria do you believe to be terrorists?
If it looks like a terrorist, if it acts like a terrorist, if it walks like a terrorist, if it fights like a terrorist, it's a terrorist. The representatives of the coalition command have always been saying that their targets are ISIL, al-Nusra and other terrorist groups. This is basically our position as well. We see eye to eye with the coalition on this one.
The Americans don't seem to think so.
Continuing down a path of carrying out military operations in an indiscriminate fashion against the Syrian opposition is actually going to run counter to the stated goals of Russia, because it only will prolong the sectarian conflict that has torn that country apart.
The Kremlin's objectives in Syria are not just military, they're also geopolitical. For President Putin, Russian airstrikes in Syria are more than just a means of fighting international terrorism. They're a way of bolstering a key ally, President Assad, of strengthening Russian influence in the Middle East, and of showing the world that a resurgent Russia needs to be reckoned with. But there are risks. US and French fighter jets are already operating in Syria. Russian bombers make Syrian airspace more crowded and more dangerous. Moscow and Washington held talks today on how to reduce the risk of a clash or a collision. Russia believes it has outmaneuvered the West in Syria, and that Russian airstrikes will turn the tide of war in President Assad's favour. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, the BBC has obtained exclusive footage of what appears to be the aftermath of a Russian airstrike in Syria, which locals say left 18 people dead. Sources on the ground claim there were no Islamic State fighters in the area near Talbise. It's under the control of the Free Syrian Army, which has received support from the Americans. Our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville reports.
From the air, Russia says it has the Islamic State firmly in its sights. But on the ground in Syria, a different story is emerging. In Talbise, this airstrike